Today we're going to go over 7 tips I wish I would have known when I started color grading in DaVinci Resolve. The first one is the difference between primary wheels and the log wheels. So if you don't know what they are, if you come down here into the color wheels area, there's a drop down here which you can go to the primary wheels, which you're probably used to, and then you also have log wheels. And in here you have primary bars. The bars and the primary wheels are pretty much the same. It's just laid out a little differently to manipulate colors. But the log wheels work a little bit differently. As you can see, they have shadows, midtones, highlights. The primary wheels have lift, gamma, gain. Both pretty much the same thing, just different terminology depending on where you came into color grading. If I go over to log, one of the big things that you'll notice is down here, we only have 3 parameters that we're changing. And then coming over to the primary bars, we have 4. The fourth one is luminance. So if you were to move this little slider here, you'll see that we're just bringing up all the brightness in a shot. Compared to if we come over here, as we move this up, we're moving all of the red, green, and blue channels up to give us a brightness level. They work a little bit differently. Let me go over to a shot that this would be more noticeable. So over here, if we come back to our primary bars or primary wheels and we lift this up, we can see as we lift it, we're not really gaining too much saturation. We're just bringing that luminance level up higher. If I went over into the log wheels and I did the same thing, what you'll notice is as I bring it up, I'm gaining more saturation. Now I can take it all the way up and blow out, but we're gaining more saturation. Let me just make another node here and show you the difference between these two again. So if I turn off this one, we can see that I kind of went too high, but as we bring this up, we still don't really have saturation here. But then this one, as we brought it up, it's still getting blown out. Obviously I went too far, but just to show you, now we're bringing color in because we're just taking the red, green, and blue channels and boosting those instead of just a luminance channel. So that's the first thing. But that's not really the thing that I wish I would have known when I got started. The thing I wish I would have known when I got started are primary wheels. We have pretty much, our highlights for our gain, then we have the gamma in the middle, and then we have the lift down at the bottom. So as we manipulate these, they're kind of predetermined locations where they intersect, where the different correctors intersect. Now there is a way to change that a little bit, but it wouldn't change it for shot by shot. The cool thing is that if I come over to the log wheels, and let's say we change this to purple, we can see that obviously all of the highlighted parts, all the really bright parts are purple. But what we can do down here is we have a high range. And what the high range is where this corrector intersects with the midtones, and you could take it all the way down and kind of have it overlap the shadows as well. So as I move this, if we look over here, as I move this, we're interacting with more and more of the shot. So if I move this up, we can see that we're slightly here. We're starting to blend out here a little bit, even though that is bright. But as I move this down, we're starting to introduce a lot more to this. So the log wheels are definitely something to give a shot. If you've never played around with them, just play around with them a little bit and try to wrap your head around how they're different than the primary wheels, because it's very powerful once you can play with the high and low range as well as the pivot for how they intersect each other for the correctors. So the next thing is shared nodes. Now let's say we have for this shot here, let's say we just bring up the saturation a bit, right? And maybe we make the highlights a little brighter, and let's bring the shadows down just a little bit. So something like that. Maybe that looks like a great shot, and I just want to duplicate that across all of these, but maybe I'll need to do like a slight adjustment at some point. One of the cool things you can do is you can take a node. Bring this over a little bit, but you can take a node and you can share it. So all it is it's like a linked node that anything that changes on that node changes to anywhere else that linked node is present. So to do this, you just right click and we go here, save shared node. And once you save it, there's 2 or 3 things that happen. One, it becomes a shared node. 2, it gets locked, and 3, its name gets changed to shared node. So what you can do is you can just come in here, unlock, double click up here, and you can say, maybe make this one overall, and then we can go back and lock it. You don't have to lock it, but it's just one of those easy things so that you don't, mess it up later. So now I have this one node, and we can see this little arrows here just states that it's a shared node. If I come over to here, now I go to make a node, right? I still have all of the different ways in which I can make a node, right? But then I have this overall node. This is that shared node. So I click that, and boom, all of the correctors that are on this other node are now here. Let's say I'm on this one and I'm going back and forth. These are shot in the same exact area. Everything is exactly the same, but I want to change something a little bit in here. I can come in here, unlock. Just going to make this a drastic change so we can see it. And we can see that it's already represented over here. So that's a node that gets shared in between. That's very, very powerful. Additionally, with nodes, let's say we get a bunch of nodes and we start something up. Let's just reset that, and we get some like saturation going in here. And then let's go over to our next node, and I don't know, we just get a bunch of different correctors going on in here, right? Let's say we have a grade going and it's kind of chaotic in here, and we have a bunch of like other random things in here. Like we get the parallel nodes going and just a bunch of stuff. You can take all of those nodes that are kind of like semi-done, and then let's say we just come into here and we make it a compound node. It comes into a compound node, and we can change this to like, maybe this was the trees that we were working on or something of that nature. Then all we have to do to go into there, you hold down Control, double click, and now we're in here. If we need to go back, we can just simply go back. But it's just a way to like tidy up a set of nodes, if it gets kind of chaotic. That's something I didn't know, and I would have this, tons of nodes going in here that I wouldn't know what to do. Every once in a while I might go clean up nodes, but overall it was just really hectic. But being able to make a compound node, being able to then go into it and fix any problem, like I was saying, the eyes or maybe the headlights on a car or something of that nature. It's just nice to be able to put them in a group and clean up if you would ever have to come back to working on a particular shot. So yeah, that's one of the ones, making a combiner node. Now next, since I showed you how to take a node and kind of share it between different shots, and I showed you how to take nodes and make them into like a group with the compound node, what I want to show you now is how to take different shots and put those into groups, because this is pretty cool too. So let's just clear all of this, and let's actually just take all of these shots and clear them. Now we know that these two shots are the same. Well, I know that these two shots are in the same location, and then this one's in a different location. So like, let's say these two shots, for the most part, they're the same. I want to add the same grade to them. I can highlight both of them. I'm just holding Shift and then just clicking to highlight them. And then I can right click. And if you had a current group, you could add to a current group, but I'm currently going to make a new group and make this waterway. So that's the group. Now they are in a group. I can still go in and individually change them, but now they're in a group. And if you didn't notice this, if I look at this one that's not in a group, currently we have two dots up here. If I go to the drop down, I can change the clip node tree, or I can change the timeline node tree. I'll get to the timeline node tree and what that means, but typically you guys are going to be changing the clip node tree. Each clip has its own node tree, for correctors. Now, if I go over to one of the groups, what you'll see is now there's 4 dots here. And if I go down, I have a pre group, the clip, a post group, and then the timeline again. And just like how we were manipulating that one shared node and then adding it to another clip node tree, what I can do is I can come into, let's say, the pre group, and I can add in some correctors in here. I'm just going to go wild here so I can see it. Now, if I come over to here, this shot already has it. The biggest thing to remember is if you when you're creating your looks is how these are getting processed, because how they get processed can really dictate how the clip gets altered. And the main thing is if you ever use LUTs, because LUTs actually take away, I don't want to say quality, but they take away tonality values for sure, depending on how the LUT's made. Most LUTs, actually, it's kind of 50-50. If a LUT takes away a lot or a little. I did a video a while ago, last year I believe, that I made I think it was like a Super 8 look, and the LUT itself, part of it was to take out a lot of tonality values, because that older film stock really didn't have it when it was rescanned. That is like one of the things that you have to make sure of, because if you make a LUT, let's go, you go into pre-group, you throw a LUT on, and all of your shots after that, or all of the added nodes after that, are going to be manipulated by that. So sometimes it might be good to do it after, because if you've ever seen a LUT on, like, let's say it's a really heavy graded LUT that gives you a very specific look, and it's very different than where it starts out. One thing that you'll notice is if you take that LUT and you put it in a shot that it's really overexposed, it's going to look really bad. In the same way, a lot of the times if you have it underexposed, it looks really bad. If you were to take that LUT and put it into the pre-clip group, what's going to happen is that's going to be the first thing that gets processed, and then any adjustments after that will then get processed. So like the LUT that I made for the Super 8, it was taking away tonality values. So then after that, if I went into the clip, I wouldn't have, that dynamic range that a lot of the cameras nowadays are, shooting for, and that's why you're spending the extra $1 for all of that extra dynamic range. If you just throw a LUT at the beginning, you're going to lose all of that. And what ends up happening with LUTs is you're remapping values. You're taking one value and you're remapping it to another value. I'll go into why I personally don't use LUTs, why they're good, why I use them in like my camera and stuff like that, but why when I'm color grading I really don't use LUTs, other than to get a overall set of colors that I'm looking for. But for the most part, I don't really use them. So that's just something to be aware of when you're working in this. But the idea here is that it's first going to get processed by all the nodes that are in the pre-group, and then it's going to go all the nodes that are in the clip view, and then all the nodes that are in the post, and then finally timeline. And the cool thing is that if they're in the groups, all of those clips that are in that group will be affected. So that's kind of cool. And then if you need to, you can go into a particular shot. So like, let's say this one, and let's just to make it drastic so we can actually see this, we're just going to go real crazy. So both of these are in a group, but they both look, actually, let's just go real far. They both look completely different, and they have, the clip nodes that are then going to affect just that clip. And the same thing with timeline, that's going to affect everything on the timeline. Maybe you have to put a limiter on because wherever your project is going to be shot, it has to be in a legal range or something like that. You could then add it here. It'll be the last thing that gets processed. There are limiters in DaVinci Resolve to limit the your color space and stuff like that, but if you wanted to do it this way, you could do it this way. Or if maybe at the timeline you wanted to add your LUT, you could add it here, and it'll be the last thing that gets processed. So all of your clips before, you can make sure that they're all balanced, that they all look good, that they all look consistent, and then you can throw the LUT on at the end if you wanted to. So there's tons of different ways. It's just something that I didn't know when I was first starting. And once you wrap your head around it, the power behind it is really crazy, and it can save you a lot of time once you figure out the proper way of doing it. Let's go reset, and let's come in here, reset, and I think that was all. Okay, so now let's say we take a shot and we start to color it, and let's say we get some really good values in here. Let's say we want that to be a little more like that, and let's add a bit more saturation up here. Let's actually bring down the luminance up here. So something of that nature. Let's say that that looks great. Let's add a little bit more contrast. Something like that. And we can also come into our yellows and greens and maybe bring up the saturation in that a little bit. So like, let's say this is perfect. This is the color grade that I want. This is what I want to do. One of the things that you can do is you can take this shot and you can use it to match. So you could grab a still. Now if I come over to my gallery, I have a still here. And let's say I was working on this shot. Now I can click this button, and this was the current one that I have active. I can see, let's close this. I can grab this and I can try to color match these if I want it to, so I can see both of them here at the same time. It's a cool way. And you can flip it so you can see, you know, going this way. There's a couple other settings, but so that's a cool thing that you can do. And if you wanted to, you could export this as an image. Maybe that's the image that you use as a thumbnail, or, you know, a potential grade idea that you can send in an email. What do you think about this? The cool thing, the really cool thing about this image over here also has extra data. If I come into a different shot and I can right click, I can go apply grade. What it also has is it has all of my node tree for that clip when I initially went grab still. So now let's turn this off. Now I have that grade that I had on this other shot over here, but you could just say, oh, well, I can just, you know, go into a shot, middle mouse button over another shot, and I'll grab it. That's cool. But the real cool thing that you can do is you can now make a whole set of these. When they're in the stills, that's just for that project. So maybe you have other timelines, you can bring that in and you can use that on other timelines. So that's a cool thing you could do. The other thing is power grade. And you can just right click, you can add a still library or a power grade library. The power grade library stays in DaVinci Resolve for that database. So I don't know, some people use different databases, some do, some don't. But the cool thing you can do is it will stay in the database in which it was made. So you could take a whole set of different looks that you like, and you could save them as a power grade and then use them later, and they're all nodes. So you could go in and manipulate them. Unlike a LUT where you can't really manipulate it, the only thing you can do is reduce the amount of its effect. Like if you, let's just do a quick LUT here. And I can come to my LUTs and let's grab a LUT that people use a lot, and like this one. So then we're going to apply that to the current node. Okay, so like let's say this was a LUT. What you could do is you could come into here and you could reduce its intensity on a node. Let me actually, before that, let's add a little saturation here so it's actually changing colors. Okay, so what you could do is you could change how intense, you know, that is. That's one thing you could do, but now I can't go in here and it, like I was saying before, it's going to affect the image however it was built to affect the image. It's nice for like a one button click, done, whatever. I'm going to actually be making libraries of power grades that are going to act like LUTs, but you can go in and you could say, oh, that's a little too green. Which node was that on? And they'll be labeled. And then you could come over and you could say, okay, let's reduce the saturation on the green. And then over here, let's reduce the saturation a little bit in the sky. You know what I mean? So you would have the ability, or you could say, you know what, that's a little too teal. Let's bring that back just a little bit. And you could, you know, go through and manipulate those. So that's kind of why I like power grades. So I don't know when. Hopefully in the next month or so, I'll be able to make a couple of those libraries that you guys could then get and install into your DaVinci Resolve. And then you have an easy way to edit colors similar to LUTs, but you have a lot more flexibility to make it work for your footage. And then you could also put in color space transforms and different things like that. When the time comes, I'll explain that. You know, if you're working, let's say I build it for the Blackmagic color space, but then let's say you have a Sony, You could do a color space transform to get into that Sony color space, and then you could add that same thing and get similar results. I'll go into that more. That's a whole video in itself that would take a little while, but there's so much power in DaVinci Resolve that a lot of people, when they get into it, they really don't know about it. But that's another one, being able to share, or excuse me, being able to save your looks. So then finally, it's using multiple tools to get to an end goal. So as you can see here, we started color grading this, and when I added all of these teal effects, it was kind of in the same color space, because if we take a look at this, let's bypass all of this. Let's make this a little bit bigger. We can see that, you know, we have a blue up here. Down here we have a blue. Let's disable some of this stuff so I can show you. So if I just add saturation in here, what you can see is we have a blue up here, but then because this is so far out, we also have like a haze that's a blue, and it was changing the color of that as well with our color grade that we had set here. So one of the things that you can do is you can also take a tool and have it affected by another part of a tool. So we have, you know, a huge suite of a whole bunch of different types of correctors. So what I did here is I took a hue and I changed it with a different hue. So I took that blue that we had and I made it more teal, right? So I can increase this more, and we start to get into the greens, but let's bring it back down a little bit, and then let's bring up that saturation so we can see it a bit more. And then let's maybe drop this down just a little bit so it gets a little richer. But what you can see here is it's changing all of this. Maybe we just want it to be the sky. Well, if we look at this initial shot, we can see that the sky is higher in luminance values than down here. So what we can do is, let's say we like this color up here, but we don't want it really over all of this here, is we could come in and then we could use other tools to manipulate this one tool. As like, I guess you could say, like a mask. It's a qualifier, but for this, instead of just picking the blue, what I would end up doing is either turning these off and just using luminance, or you can come over to this one, which is just the luminance bar. And let's turn this on so we can actually see how we're affecting this. If we bring this across, we can see that we're getting rid of all of that ground there. We got a little bit up here, so we'll come back to that as well. So now if we look at this, I used two different tools. I used the qualifier to mask out where I wanted the other tools to apply the actual color grade, and then over here on the curves, I added in the correction that I wanted to have. Now you could say, okay, instead of using curves, instead of using any curves, what I could do is I could come over to the highlights, and let's add a little bit of teal into the highlights. And then, you know, maybe we can get a look like that. Let's actually come out of log and do it over here. So then there we go. So that's kind of something else that you can do. Now it makes it a little bit differently, because now I'm taking that white value and I'm manipulating it, compared to on the curves, I was taking the areas that actually had color values, like the blue and stuff up here. I was taking those and then just shifting, taking those colors and then just shifting those colors over, but I still had this like little blown out section. You know, I just never knew that you could use one corrector and then also come into the qualifier and use that as well. But yeah, that's just something. And then on top of that, if you wanted to, you could use all of these things. So let's get a kind of crazy grade going here. So it's up here. And then let's say if we wanted to, we could also use this also. So now I'm only correcting, I'm using the qualifier so I don't get any of the ground or this foliage. And then I'm also using the power window to stay within this area here. So then, you know, I don't know, maybe you could make that look like a sunset or something, or some type of crazy look. I don't know. But it's just cool that you can use all these different tools. I didn't know that that existed before, or I just really didn't know that you had the ability to use multiple tools and to create really cool effects. I used to just do it on each node, and then yeah, I would end up using alpha channels and all sorts of crazy stuff. But yeah, this is kind of a really cool thing that you can do to really manipulate an image more so using multiple tools to make sure that you get the right set of different parameters here. Now if I look at this, if I actually took this all the way across, I could make this sort of look like that. I could make that sort of look like it was like, I don't know, it looks kind of terrible actually. But yeah, being able to use multiple tools to really shape the area in which you're using as a corrector, and then also being able to come into the curves and pulling just specific color values to manipulate. But yeah, that's kind of my 7 tips or 6 tips. Wow, I really skipped the ball on making a 7th. I guess my 7th tip here is using this lume versus saturation. And I always thought that this was really good if you're ever doing like day for night, or if you want to get a pure white and you kind of have like this little bit of saturation. So as you can see, we have really bright values here, and you can see that they're all clipped, right? But we still have a bit of a, it was almost like an orange reddish, right? So one of the things you can do is you can just click the white, or you can set a point, and then you could actually use this to pull those color values out of that area to actually get like a pure white. Now in this shot, this doesn't really make much sense and it looks kind of but if you're ever working in like doing like a day for night and you have like the dark shadows, and let's say you're pulling the blues in a little bit to get like the moonlight, but you don't want the blacks that should be there to be like, have a blue like color cast, what you could do is you could take those really dark areas and, you know, you could just make your points. You could also use the qualifier and you can pick out your points, and then you would be able to just pull the saturation. Now this is pulling out of the trees. This doesn't really look all that great, but you would be able to pull the saturation out of that lower luminance area, so that you're actually getting pure blacks in those areas instead of your color cast, because that is a real easy way to see like an amateur color grade. So that kind of covers the 7 tips I wish I would have known for the color page in DaVinci Resolve when I was starting out. Let me know what you guys think about building power grades and making a library. Would that be something of interest? What kind of, if it is, what kind of stuff do you shoot? And what kind of looks are you really into? Do you like the, you know, the greenish yellow for like fight scene sort of things that you typically see? Are you into like the Hollywood look? Are you into like the commercial, you know, the whites and the perfect skin tone sort of thing? And then also throw in there what camera you use, because I'm always interested in hearing what kind of gear that everyone is using. But with that being said, my name's JR, and thanks for watching.